and welcome back. I'm really happy to have this time with you. There's always this little trick that the universe seems to play on me. When I'm giving a talk on anger, something will completely tick me off that week. This talk is on energy and vitality, and wouldn't you know, I'm exhausted. So here we go. Vincent van Gogh, or Vincent van Gogh, I think it's pronounced. Very, very famous painter. Painted over 900 paintings, among them Starry Night, the Cafe Terrace at Night, and on and on and on. The crazy thing about him is he only sold one painting in his lifetime. When he died, he was considered a commercial failure. But what I find so interesting is what was the fire that had him painting like that? What kept him going? This is what I'd like to talk about tonight, that sense of inner fire, which is a really critical part of practice. I'd like to talk at how energy and vitality are an important part of spiritual practice. No matter what spiritual practice, and anyone in life needs vitality. To talk about the nature of energy and vitality, what gets in the way of having it really inform and fill your life, and a little bit on how to manage your energy from this perspective of mindfulness. Energy and vitality are a real part of life, and of course they're tied into passion and interest. You know, there are different times in my life when I was really filled with a lot of passion. In high school and beyond, I just wanted to be a really, really good photographer. And so I spent a lot of time in the darkroom when I was in high school, and everything I could do to learn how to be a good photographer. When I was in college, I helped to co-manage a 1,000-acre farm. I got passionate about farming, learning everything I could about that. I got passionate about teaching, about the creative process. And I'm sure if you think about times in your life when you really, really wanted something and you gave it your all, those are really special moments when there's just something inside that just, I want that. And then you muster up your energy and then you go for it. In Pali, the kind of ancient language of the Buddha, this refers to the word virya. And virya is an interesting word. Its etymology is sort of tied to the word hero. And it's kind of the strength of the warrior. It's calling on that fervor and that passion, that energy, that vitality to go for what you want. And of course, the question is, when you struggle with inertia or laziness or torpor, how do you call on energy? How do you get it back? How do you develop energy? So when you want something really, really bad, you're ready to make sacrifices for it. There are all these things you're willing to do. There are things you're willing to not do. And so for me, when I got into photography, I spent 40 hours a week in the darkroom, by myself, learning how to develop and learning all this stuff. It was passionate, but I gave up a lot in order to learn that. And anything you want to do, whether it's an advanced degree or any skill you want to develop, you are going to engage and make sacrifices for it. But when it comes to spirituality, the question is, what if you really want to be awake? What if you really want to realize the nature of reality? What if you really want to wake up your capacity for wisdom, to see reality clearly, and your capacity of compassion to develop a heart that can hold reality? This is part of how we bring virya into our spiritual practice. Because when you want to wake up, it automatically means you're willing to play the edge. You're willing to go where you're not comfortable and investigate those places. That's what it's all about. And in order to play those edges, because if you want to be awake, you've got to be willing to look at where you're not awake. If you want to develop kindness and compassion, you need to look closely at all the places where you're mean and petty and selfish and closed down. Bringing attention to that edge is really, really challenging. And it's really summed up well when you go on a meditation retreat. If you've not gone on an intensive 7-day or 10-day retreat, a little bit of how it works is you sort of show up opening day, and most people, at least for me, whether I'm participating or leading one, on some level I'm just exhausted. I have like zero attention. And so the mind wanders. There's the sloth and torpor. There's the whiplash meditation. The mind's all over the place. You're in these kind of hypnagogic states, and you're just swimming in kind of a sense of sleepy, torpory, not really there. And then what happens is, over time, you've got a little more attention, but you really don't have access to feeling. Like, you're not really feeling the moment. There's some energy, you get streams of sensation, but then as you start to get more rested and at the same time more energy, suddenly you start to become more aware of what's actually happening in the moment. So when you're feeling the breath is not just a concept of the breath moving in and the breath moving out. You suddenly have an attention to kind of the microscopic attention to the flow of that whole breathing mechanism. And of course, in the practice, the mind wanders and you begin again, and you bring your awareness back to sensations. And it's not perfect, but the more you become more present moment sensation-based, then you start to notice there's more. You begin to unpack your experience. You begin to see, like, wow, there are not only sensations going on, but there's this nuance around effort. There's this awareness of your relationship to what's happening, of noticing when there's some kind of clinging or holding on to the moment, or something you're not liking about the moment, or just kind of a general sense of confusion about the moment. And you begin to see that there's a relationship between the quality of your effort and the quality of your experience. And then you begin to see more and more into the nature of reality itself. So you begin with this sort of restless, I'm not really here, and then settling, building energy at the same time. And then an aliveness begins to arrive in your experiences. Part of the magic of being on a long-term retreat, but also as you're living your life, just noticing those times when you don't have the firepower to be present. But the times when you do, when you sleep really well and you wake up and suddenly you're just more aware, you're more awake, you're more alive. How do we cultivate that? Meditation, at least through this particular lens, talks about 5 powers, if you will. These are kind of like the things you draw on. One is faith. And faith, I can go on and on about faith, but basically, faith is a willingness to experiment, a willingness to come back to the present moment. It doesn't mean blind faith, but what it means is there's a willingness to try something on and verify it for yourself. So there's a sense of kind of a healthy sense of like, okay, so I hear this is good for me. I'm going to give it a shot and see if it really is. The second power, if you will, is mindfulness. And again, think of mindfulness as non-judging awareness, or the definition I like as of late is mindfulness is present moment awareness without the filter of greed, hatred, or delusion. So present moment awareness without grasping, without clinging, and without a mind that's wandering. So that aliveness of here and now. As I breathe in, I'm aware of breathing in. As I breathe out, I'm aware of breathing out. That capacity to observe without trying to manipulate your experience. Now, what goes along with mindfulness is the third power, which is concentration. That's the capacity to stay on point, to actually choose an object and keep your attention on that object. The fifth quality is wisdom, and wisdom is really the capacity to see what's actually true, to kind of get under your preference, your story, your narrative, to what's actually happening. So these four qualities, and there's one more. Faith, the willingness to bring yourself present. Mindfulness, the capacity to observe without judgment. Concentration, the capacity to narrow your attention onto a fixed point. Wisdom, the capacity to really see what's clearly, are all supported by energy. Because you need gas in the tank to engage into this practice. So those are the five powers. And of course, Buddhist philosophy is filled with these lists. And I like these lists. So another list where energy is really critical is referred to as the 7 factors of awakening. And this is so interesting to me because when you want to wake up, let's say you're hit either with physical pain or emotional turmoil or some kind of mental state that's really, really difficult. What has to be present for you to really wake up to it? So here are the 7. Again, mindfulness, self-observation without judgment. See what's there. Investigation. This is the desire to really see the nature of reality. I'm willing to look a little bit deeper. I'm willing to have tea with this demon here. Energy is the determination, the effort, the firepower to stay with it. You need a quality of joy or rapture. This is almost like a joyous quality of like, wow, what is this? I'm excited about learning what this is. But at the same time, you need tranquility or relaxation to really be able to feel it. You need concentration, one-pointed awareness. And you need some quality of equanimity, that is, a capacity to really accept reality as you find it. So a lot of these seem almost contradictory, but they're all factors that go into waking up. And again, self-observation without judgment. A desire to really go look closer, to really investigate. Determination and effort to stay with it. And cultivating a sense of joy, of discovery, while at the same time relaxing and yet being one-pointed, and then holding it with equanimity, with a sense of a willingness to accept reality as it is. And the interesting thing here is, quite often when we hit the hard stuff and we can't be with it, we beat ourselves up. But the truth is, if one of these factors is missing, or a couple of these factors are missing, you really can't be with it. And one of those big factors is energy. It takes firepower. It takes gas in the tank to swim upstream against something that's really, really challenging, something that may be part of your conditioning that's been there forever and ever and ever. You've got to have vitality and energy in order to swim against that current. And so we're always in this process of balancing out energy and vitality and relaxation, because you have to be relaxed in order to practice, but you have to be alert. And so relaxation is a critical part of the practice. And this is a kind of if it goes too far, here's the razor's edge. If you go too much into relaxation, you go into like hypoarousal. That's dullness, it's drowsiness, it's sleep. And those meditations where you're kind of in a hypnagogic state where the dream fragments are coming through. Well, if you go a little more onto this side, you're going into hyperarousal. That's when you're agitated and you're restless and you're feeling anxiety. The path, of course, is the middle way. And why sometimes you'll see very contradictory instructions given to different students. One person will be told to apply themselves a little more, sit up a little straighter, sit a little longer. And someone else might receive some instructions to take more breaks, relax, go for a walk, have a cup of tea. And what I love about the practice ultimately, while there are external teachers who can give us counsel and advice, what we're really focusing on awakening is our own inner knowing. And that inner knowing is the knowing that says, you're wound up a little tight right now. You're a little caught up in hypervigilance. Let's do some calming. Or on the other hand, you're not really leaning in here. You could sit up a little bit straighter. There's something in you that knows how to find that sense of balance. So much of our practice is about managing our energy. It's about balancing our energy so we can be fully present. And when we begin to really listen and open up to the energy, things get really interesting, because energy, life force, prana, chi, ki, Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it, is a fascinating thing to tune into. For many years, I used to supervise fasting retreats, which would be like 7 days, and people would stop eating what they were normally eating, and then they would move on to real purifying foods. And for some, it might be juices. For others, it might be a mono diet of like brown rice and greens. For others, it might be kind of a vegetable broth. And we'd go through this process together of basically resting, refraining from eating what we were normally eating, and then just pouring in these really, really good healing foods. And then being outside, meditating, relaxing, doing all kinds of experiences. And what would be so interesting is over the course of the week, people would go through these healing crises where suddenly they'd have really, really bad breath. And then that would clear out. Or there'd be some digestive issues that would kind of clear out. Or quite often, there'd be this horrible body odor that would sort of be released in the room, and then it would clear up. And really what it was as the body was throwing off what it didn't need, it was able to purify. It was able to kind of throw off these toxins in the system. And I would like to think of how a meditation practice is like being on a fast. You're drinking in non-judging present moment awareness. That's like drinking in pure juice or pure food, being present without criticism. What a powerful experience. And in the meantime, kind of letting go what isn't you. So there can be quite an amazing process of self-cleansing or purification that occurs in this practice. This energy, this life force, it runs your autonomic nervous system. You don't have to think about blinking. You don't have to think about taking the next breath. It runs that for you. This life force also knows how to heal. If you break your arm, pretty much what you do is you set it and rest, and then it knows how to knit the bones together. If you get a fever, it knows how to mobilize all the antibodies to raise the body temperature, to get those toxins out of there. But it also has an innate intelligence to make you more whole on other levels as well. And so you're in this dance all the time. I'm very informed by yoga in my background and my training. And one thing yoga philosophy says is think of who you are as two essential elements. Boil it down to two. One is prana, or energy. So you're a being of energy. We are also a being of awareness, of the mind and awareness. That's it. And you're balancing out energy and awareness the whole time. So what's so fascinating is, like in a yoga pose, you go into a posture and you're hanging out there, and you go to that place where in yoga we like to say where it hurts good. It's unpleasant, but there's something in you that goes like, this kind of hurts, but it's kind of a good hurt. I have some intuitive sense if I hang out here long enough and I relax into it, something's going to shift. So you feel something tight, congested, not flowing. You hang out at that edge. You recognize it. You breathe. You make room for it. You investigate it. You soften where you can soften. You bring a little kindness to it, and then that tight block very well might begin to ease and soften and flow. Suddenly you've got free-flowing energy. Normally what happens is you'll have that free-flowing energy. Your body will feel a little bit more homeostasis, and then it's going to go to the next place where it's not flowing, where it's stuck. And then again, you can bring attention, recognize it, allow, make room, investigate it, bring some empathy, relax, and then that may begin to shift and may begin to open. It's one of the things of really why I often say the thing I most love about yoga is how good I feel when I stop doing yoga. You know, it energizes. We could open up those blocks with awareness and energy. Things begin to open up. And we're in this incredible flow of balancing energy and awareness. And you know what it's like when you're disconnected from the energy, you're disconnected from your body. You know, you come home, let's say you come home late at night, or you're not coming home now because you're home. But at the end of the day, you realize you're completely disconnected. You're just from the here up. Well, what you'll naturally want to do, well, maybe to have a beer or a glass of wine, or go for a walk, or play with a dog, or put on some music, or dance around, or take a nap. And then you begin to feel again, and you'll feel like, oh God, I'm back. This feels great. But then there are times when there's so much energy, and you'll feel sort of that restless, hypervigilant anxiety. You've got 1,000 ideas, but you can't execute one of them. What you want to do there is like emphasize more of the awareness, concentration, calm, arrive. So you're intuitively looking for this balance the entire time. And the practice of meditation itself is really about being aware of how you can maintain that balance. As the saying goes, you can't make enlightenment happen. You know, enlightenment is an accident. Meditation makes you accident prone. You can create the most optimal environment as you can. And so what this really means is when you're wanting to calm, when you're wanting to arrive, maybe if you're wanting to see more clearly into the nature of reality, you're wanting to see what's underneath that tension that you're carrying inside, what you'll want to do is to kind of reduce distractions. You want to cultivate focus and sustain attention there. You'll want to call on present moment awareness, you know, free from the filter of greed, hatred, and delusion. And when you hang out there long enough, something's bound to happen. So when you really begin to pay attention, oftentimes there is this low-hanging fruit in the beginning. You suddenly sing, oh, I can't believe I was believing that. Or suddenly I feel so much more spacious. I feel so much more creative. And as you continue in your practice, it's like you're unpeeling an onion. The outer layers of the onion are a little bit easier to peel away. But then when you start getting closer to the onion, it gets more challenging. I remember once on a retreat, there was a woman doing all the right practices. There every single set. Doing the walking meditation, eating mindfully, maintaining silence, avoiding eye contact, very, very present. We met for an interview, and she said, I think I'm doing everything I'm being asked to do here, but I feel terrible. Am I doing something wrong? And then she said, how do I get rid of this feeling? I was reminded by a quote from the teacher U Tejaniya. He said, the worst thing you can do is possibly think, how can I get rid of this? Because the desire to not have anything bad happen is what causes our worst fears to arise. The mind doesn't want any sorrow or suffering. Is the mind that creates the most anxiety. So that sense of like, something's wrong, how I get rid of it, not so helpful. And I actually pointed out to her that you're doing everything right. And as the joke goes, you know, you're feeling better. You're feeling your grief better. You're feeling your sadness better. But you're also feeling your joy better. And really what was happening was she was drinking in this nectar of present moment non-judging awareness, she was building energy, and she was becoming more and more aware of what was out of sorts, of what just didn't fit anymore. And part of their healing crisis was a very product of the fact that she was cultivating energy and vitality. She was able to see what she hadn't seen before. She was able to feel things that she wasn't able to feel before. And it became a real opportunity for a shift. And so the question really becomes, how honest are you with what's going on in your life? If you're feeling less than high energy, what's holding you back? As that phrase goes, or the question goes, what are you not willing to feel? And this is where this practice of self-observation without judgment becomes really critical, because, again, when you begin to practice with sincerity, you'll begin to feel things you hadn't felt in a long time. You'll begin to see things you hadn't seen in a long time. You'll begin to notice things you may not have noticed in a long time, or maybe even ever. And you'll start to become more aware of the attitude in your mind and how that plays into your experience of energy. The classic line, the classic metaphor, I can't find a better one, is this line between what you're aware of and what you're not aware of. You relax, you pay attention, the line begins to move, you start to become more aware of the unseen, unfelt places, the conditioning in your life. You begin to see more of that filter of greed, desire, and hatred, the wanting mind, the aversive mind, the confused mind. And you begin to see how you might be caught or stuck. You begin to see where there's too much energy, you begin to sense where there's too little energy. I've always loved the line that depression is anger without the energy. It takes real courage. And there are lots of traditions out there that focus on this awakening of energy and the balancing of energy. All these energy systems out there, using yoga to awaken and settle the energy, the chakras, the nadis. Have you ever done the microcosmic orbit, where you're sending awareness through your body and awakening the meridians of energies? It's all very, very powerful stuff. There are systems and practices to awaken energy. There are systems to cool energy. Ultimately, though, it comes down to self-awareness and self-diagnosis. What am I feeling right now? What's my experience right now? How does this want me to be with that? If there's too little energy, how do you work with that? If there's too much energy, how do you work with that? A story I like to tell, which is it's a Zen story, which means it's not funny. It's the story of this great meditation master, this woman who was radiant in her practice, and people would come from all around just to be in her presence. They just feel this amazing energy coming off her. And someone asked her, "What's the secret to your radiance? What is the secret to the aliveness that you radiate out there?" And her response was, "I eat when I'm hungry and I sleep when I'm tired." Told you it wasn't funny. But when I heard that, I thought, what if it was that simple? How many times do I eat when I'm not hungry? How many times do I not sleep when I'm tired? How many times do I override my fundamental experience of my life force? And I think that an integral part of the practice is to do everything you can to build energy, to strengthen your immune system, And there are a couple factors that go into this. One of them is to really reflect on what you love and what enlivens you. What do you naturally feel passion toward? The other is to reflect on what are you engaging in that actually drains energy. So just a short reflection, if you will. If you like, you can close your eyes and take 3 slow, deep breaths. And if you would, think of 3 things that give you energy. 3 things you love. When you think about them now, you may feel a little bit enlivened, a little bit juiced up. And if you would now, think of just 3 things that drain you, that drain your energy. Where you can feel your energy sort of dropping or kind of leaching out. Then if you like, you can deepen your breath. You can open your eyes. Now, when it comes to identifying what you could call your drains and your gains, the things that build energy, the things that take energy away, you have 2 options. One is you can change the externals. Sometimes you can do that. When I think of my never-ending email list that I have to deal with, I could stop doing email. I'm not sure that's really viable. So my other option is, if I can't change the internals, is then I need to work on the internals. So it doesn't necessarily drain me as much. But knowing these 3 things, and it's really, really interesting to make a list, everything that gives you energy, all the stuff that drains your energy. Put the stuff that gives you energy, stick it up on the wall next to your computer, because then you can look at it from time to time and realize, oh yeah, going for a walk feels really, really good. Or like taking some time to read, that's really, really juicy. Or playing with the dog, that feels really good. I find that helpful because it's a reminder that I can actually do something to give me energy when my energy is a little bit low. Then when you do your inventory of the stuff you don't like, you can explore, is there a way to change the externals and not do them? Or the harder work is to work on the internals. Is there something about your attitude? And probably the most dramatic experience I had of that was when I was the head of a large organization and had a consultant, really kind of a fancy consultant. And I had sort of mistakenly assumed that the reason why I had this fancy consultant was so I'd have someone who I could personally complain to. And then one day he said, you know what? If you don't like this job, you should just let it go and move on. And it kind of shocked me a little bit. He said, if you can't find a way to wake up excited about coming to work, then you really need to make an adjustment here. And it was a really good reality check for me, because I realized I did have an attitude of complaining. And yet I realized in my heart of hearts, I wasn't ready to let it go. And so I really started to work on my attitude. That I want to be excited about waking up in the morning. And I actually had control over that attitude. So I recommitted to the job with a different attitude, and it was very, very helpful. Eventually, I did let it go, but that gave me a burst of new possibilities. So something to reflect on. If there's something that's draining your energy, is there a way to rework it so your attitude isn't quite so siphoned off by it? And when it comes to my email, I've pretty much decided I can do what I do, and that's it. So I don't feel it draining quite as much. I also try the 2-minute rule. If I can't handle it in 2 minutes, I wait. I try and take time to schedule my day when it's better to deal with it. But again, managing how I work with it. But energy is so primary. Another way to look at how to build energy is to really, quite practically, is to look at your morning routine. What do you do in the morning when you wake up to help you get the best start to your day so your energy is up and moving? That's why in the military, the first thing you do is you make your bed, because you get an instant sense of accomplishment. And I've been fascinated by people's morning routines to see how highly effective people start their day. And there's some fascinating things that people do. And certainly what I found very, very helpful for me is to roll out of bed and move. Make the bed, get outside if I can, have an adventure. I've also found ending a shower with cold water is, do some research on that if you're interested. It's powerful. Stand under really, really cold water for 3 minutes. You're not going to fall asleep. Find a way to focus on getting some ritual that helps you collect. Focus on what's most important. I do the 3 things I'm going to get done. If I get these 3 things done, then it's going to be a great day. That allows me to really focus without being distracted by all the other 10,000 things that I need to do. I think more and more, particularly as we're challenged by the coronavirus right now, it's very, very clear that those who are suffering the most, in some way their health, their energy is compromised. There's some underlying cause. So to do what you can to really invest in your immune system, to really build your health, build your vitality, is really, really a very, very powerful thing to do. Quite often people will sort of attack those who do yoga or meditation or have a lot of self-care protocols as being narcissistic and self-indulgent. And again, back to the analogy which I use a lot, is when your cup is full and overflowing, that is to say, when your energy and your vitality is in flow mode and you've got more coming out of you than you need, life is very, very different. And I really believe that is your responsibility and our responsibility to fill that cup. Part of how we do that is to have a really, really close look at what are you doing now that is draining you? What are you doing now that is fulfilling you, that's giving you energy? How might you adjust that in some way? Either change the externals or work on the internals. Take a closer look at the attitude in your mind. And to really trust that as you build that energy and that vitality, it will be of great service to you when you know truly what it is that you want in your life. Because it will allow you to focus. It'll allow you to sustain focus. It'll give you the clarity to sacrifice what needs to be sacrificed toward what you really, really want. And ultimately, where I feel this really comes into play is in all of the relationships that are the most important to you. To truly be available for those in your life that you love, that you want to support. To truly be available to be a contribution to society and to our culture. To have your energy flowing. It's a gift to yourself, but also a gift to the world. And also, if you find that when your energy is down, it's very, very easy to fall into the trap of feeling like you're doing something wrong. That if you aren't at 100%, then there's something wrong with you. That actually becomes another part of the practice, to call on compassion, kindness, self-diagnose as to what it is you're needing, what you're wanting to come more whole. Let's take a few moments here with a little meditation before we close. So if you like, you can close your eyes. You might begin to slow down your breath just a little bit. You might take a moment as you sense on the inside your experience of energy. Internally, you might feel it as pulse is tingling, vibration. And you might sense how this innate intelligence that animates your body right now, that it knows how to run your autonomic nervous system for you. It knows how to self-heal. That as you come into a closer relationship to this primal energy, as you explore how you can foster it, listen to it, cultivate it, that it can not only guide you to a stronger immune system and more vitality, but it can allow you and support you in exploring that which is most important to you. And you might just reflect in these final moments the possibility of increasing your capacity for wisdom, to see ever more clearly into the nature of reality, to see what is true. And to sense the possibility of increasing your capacity for compassion, your capacity to hold reality with an awakened heart. With kindness and compassion and joy. If you like, you can begin to deepen the breath. And as you're ready, you can open your eyes. You can think of life in terms of anything you do will have one of three outcomes. It will either give you energy and increase a sense of aliveness, or it might in some way deplete you. It might sort of take energy away. And the third option is it may be revenue neutral, no particular effect. But as you move into your own self-reflection and honestly reflect what in your life is draining you right now, what in your life is enlivening you, and to explore, is there any change needed either externally, or is there some internal change in attitude that might bring you a sense of more aliveness? That's an integral part of this path, to cultivate the firepower, the chutzpah. I think that's the Pali word, chutzpah, to help you move toward what you most want. So may you and your life force have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for your time and attention. It's great to be with you, and I wish you very, very well. Thank you.